Some background. I am 34, divorced 3 years ago from my ex-wife, Sarah. We have no kids together. Sarah has a daughter, Chloe, from her first marriage. She was 14 when Sarah and I got together, and she is 19 now. I genuinely thought of Chloe as my own, even though technically she wasn't blood family. When Sarah and I split, I figured I'd lost any connection to Chloe, but she reached out to me directly about 6 months later. Chloe had always been academically gifted, like scary smart. While Sarah and I were married, I helped with homework, drove her to academic competitions, and basically became the stable father figure she never had. Her biological dad, Mark, was in and out of the picture. Mostly out. When Chloe contacted me after the divorce, she said I was the only adult who'd ever actually supported her education and dreams. Here's where it gets complicated. Chloe wanted to apply to Harvard. Her grades were perfect, test scores through the roof, but Sarah was struggling financially after our divorce. Mark was completely unreliable for any kind of support. Chloe asked if I could help with application fees and maybe contribute to tuition if she got in. She was genuinely terrified she'd have to give up her dreams because of money. I said yes immediately. I made good money in tech consulting, had no other dependents, and I genuinely cared about this kid's future. We worked out a plan where I'd cover application costs up front, and if she got into Harvard, I'd pay for her housing and a significant chunk of tuition. We're talking about $280,000 over 4 years. Chloe was incredibly grateful and promised she'd pay me back someday when she became a successful lawyer. The Harvard acceptance letter came in March. Chloe called me crying with joy, thanking me over and over. Sarah even called to thank me, though she seemed uncomfortable about it. Mark was suddenly very interested in Chloe's life again once Harvard was involved. That is when things started getting weird. Chloe began posting constantly on Instagram about getting into Harvard, but never mentioned how she was paying for it. When people asked, she'd just say her family was helping. Fine, I didn't need credit. But then I started noticing she was introducing herself differently at family gatherings. The first red flag was at Sarah's mother's birthday dinner in April. I was still invited to family stuff because, honestly, Sarah's family liked me better than they liked Mark. Chloe was talking to her cousin about Harvard, and when the cousin asked how she was affording it, Chloe said her real family was taking care of everything. She looked directly at Mark when she said it. Mark had literally contributed nothing to Chloe's education ever. The guy couldn't even remember to pay child support consistently. But suddenly, he was taking credit for Chloe's success. When I tried to join the conversation, Chloe got this weird look and said something about how some people try to buy their way into families where they don't belong. I figured it was just teenage weirdness mixed with stress about starting college. But it kept happening. At her graduation party in June, multiple relatives congratulated Mark on doing such a great job supporting Chloe's education. He just smiled and accepted the praise. When someone asked me how I felt about Chloe going to Harvard, she interrupted and said I probably wouldn't understand since I wasn't really family. That stung, but I still didn't want to cause drama at her graduation. I pulled Chloe aside later and asked if everything was okay between us. She gave me this cold look and said she was just being honest about our relationship. According to her, I was Sarah's ex-husband who was trying to stay relevant by throwing money around. She said it was kind of pathetic that I was so desperate to feel like part of a family that wasn't mine. The real explosion came in July. Chloe posted a photo of her acceptance letter with a long caption about how grateful she was to her real family for believing in her. She specifically thanked her amazing mom and her father who never gave up on her, meaning Mark. Then came the part that made me see red. She wrote, "Special shout out to everyone who supported me authentically, not just people trying to buy their way into our family. Real love can't be purchased." The post got dozens of comments from family and friends congratulating Mark and Sarah for their sacrifice. I was furious, not just because I wasn't getting credit, but because she was actively rewriting history. Mark had been absent for most of Chloe's life. Sarah was working 2 jobs just to keep up with basic expenses. I was the one who'd spent countless evenings helping with homework and was now funding her entire Harvard education. What really broke me was realizing that Chloe genuinely saw me as some creepy guy trying to buy family affection. In her mind, I wasn't someone who cared about her success. I was a pathetic divorce with no kids of his own, desperately trying to stay connected to my ex-wife's family by throwing money around. I decided to have one final conversation with Chloe before making any decisions. I called her in early August and asked to meet for coffee. She reluctantly agreed. When I tried to explain how hurt I was by her posts and comments, she got defensive immediately. Chloe told me I was being manipulative by bringing up money. She said I was trying to guilt-trip her into performing gratitude. According to her, my support came with too many strings attached. She said Mark might not have money, but he was her actual father and deserved recognition. When I pointed out that Mark had been largely absent, and I'd been the one actually supporting her education for years, Chloe exploded. She accused me of trying to replace her real father, and said it was creepy and inappropriate that I was so invested in her life. She said Sarah had always been uncomfortable with how attached I was to Chloe. The conversation ended with Chloe telling me she didn't want my money if it came with expectations of gratitude or family inclusion. She said she'd rather take out loans than deal with my emotional manipulation. She literally called me a wannabe dad who was using financial support to force a relationship that didn't exist. I sat in that coffee shop for an hour after she left, trying to process what had just happened. This kid I genuinely loved and supported had just told me I was essentially a creepy outsider who'd been buying affection. That night, I made a decision. I logged into my bank account and canceled the automatic payment plan I'd set up for Chloe's Harvard expenses. I withdrew the $15,000 housing deposit I'd already submitted. I sent a formal email to Harvard's financial aid office stating that I would no longer be sponsoring Chloe's education. Then, I called Chloe and told her what I'd done. I explained that since she saw my support as manipulation and preferred to handle things with her real family, she was free to do exactly that. I wished her luck at Harvard and told her not to contact me again. The phone went silent for about 30 seconds. Then Chloe started screaming that I couldn't just abandon her 6 weeks before school started. She said I was proving her point about being manipulative by withdrawing support the moment she didn't show enough gratitude. She called me vindictive and said I was destroying her future out of spite. I told her I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply respecting her wishes to handle her education through her real family. If Mark was such a wonderful father and Sarah was so supportive, surely they could figure out how to fund Harvard without the creepy ex-husband's help. Chloe hung up on me. 5 minutes later, Sarah called screaming about how I was punishing a child for being honest about our relationship. She said I was being petty and vindictive, that Chloe was just a teenager who didn't understand the implications. Sarah begged me to reconsider, saying Chloe's entire future was at stake. I told Sarah the same thing I told Chloe. If I was just a pathetic ex-husband trying to buy family affection, then the family could solve this problem without me. Mark called me 2 days later. Suddenly, the absent father was very concerned about his daughter's education. He accused me of being psychotic and vengeful. He demanded I restore the funding immediately and said he'd take legal action if I didn't. I laughed and told Mark he was welcome to take legal action. But there was no law requiring me to fund someone else's education. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been getting texts and calls from various family members telling me I am being unreasonable and cruel. But here is what is really eating at me. I am hurt. I am angry that Mark gets credit for being her father while doing nothing. I am bitter that years of genuine relationship and support meant so little. Maybe that makes me petty. Maybe I should have just accepted that Chloe saw our relationship differently and continued supporting her education anyway. But I couldn't handle being treated like some pathetic hanger-on. Chloe's supposed to start at Harvard in 3 weeks. As far as I know, Sarah and Mark haven't figured out how to replace my funding. Part of me feels terrible that I might be destroying this kid's dreams over hurt feelings. But another part of me thinks Chloe needed to learn that actions have consequences. And you can't publicly humiliate someone while expecting them to continue funding your life. The response to my original post was overwhelming. Thank you to everyone who said I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt and angry. Some of you called me petty, and honestly, maybe you are right. But after what happened this week, I am starting to think this whole situation runs way deeper than I originally understood. So, where I left off, I had withdrawn Chloe's Harvard funding after she publicly called me a manipulative wannabe dad. Chloe, Sarah, and Mark were all furious. The extended family was taking sides. Harvard classes started in 10 days, and as far as I knew, nobody had figured out how to replace the $280,000 I'd promised. What I didn't expect was the absolute chaos that would follow. It started Tuesday morning when Sarah showed up at my apartment. Banging on my door at 7 a.m., she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She immediately started talking about how I was destroying Chloe's entire future over hurt feelings. She said Chloe was just a scared teenager who didn't understand the implications of what she was saying. According to Sarah, Chloe had been getting pressure from Mark to distance herself from me ever since the Harvard acceptance came through. Mark apparently told Chloe that it looked bad for him as her father if she was too grateful to her mom's ex-husband. This was the first I'd heard about Mark actively working against me. Sarah explained that Mark had been telling Chloe for months that my involvement in her life was inappropriate and confusing. He convinced Chloe that accepting my support made him look like a failure as a father. Mark apparently said that if Chloe really loved and respected him, she'd find a way to pay for college without help from the man who replaced him in her mom's bed. Sarah begged me to understand that Chloe's Instagram posts and comments weren't really her feelings. They were her trying to protect Mark's ego and prove her loyalty to him as her real father. She said Chloe actually appreciated everything I'd done but felt caught between gratitude to me and loyalty to Mark. I told Sarah that was a nice theory, but Chloe had been plenty clear about how she saw our relationship. She called me manipulative and creepy. Those weren't Mark's words coming out of her mouth. Those were her genuine feelings about me. Sarah got defensive and said I was being unreasonable. She insisted that Chloe was just confused and scared, that I should be the bigger person and restore the funding. I asked Sarah directly why she never shut down Mark's campaign against me, why she let him poison Chloe against someone who was genuinely trying to help. Sarah got quiet and admitted she thought it might be easier if Chloe wasn't so attached to me. She said it was complicated, having her daughter be closer to her ex-husband than to her actual father. That admission hit me hard. Sarah had been allowing Mark to undermine me because it simplified her life. She was okay with Chloe rejecting my support as long as it meant less drama with Mark. But now that the money was gone and Chloe's future was in jeopardy, suddenly Sarah wanted me to be understanding. 2 days later, Mark showed up. Unlike Sarah's emotional breakdown, Mark came in hot and aggressive from the start. He accused me of deliberately sabotaging his relationship with his daughter by offering financial support that made him look inadequate. According to Mark, I had manipulated the whole situation to make myself look like the hero, while making him look like a deadbeat. Mark said he'd been working to repair his relationship with Chloe for years, and my involvement had undermined every effort he made. He claimed that Chloe only saw him as a failure, because I was always there being the reliable provider and father figure. Mark insisted that if I really cared about Chloe, I would have stepped back and let him handle his responsibilities as her father. I pointed out that Mark had been largely absent from Chloe's life and had contributed almost nothing to her education. Mark exploded and said that was because I had inserted myself into situations where I didn't belong. He claimed that Chloe never gave him a chance to step up because I was always jumping in first with my wallet open. This conversation revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. Mark genuinely resented me, not just for being with Sarah, but for being the father to Chloe that he'd never managed to be. In his mind, I had stolen his role and then used money to make it permanent. Mark demanded that I restore Chloe's funding and then back off completely from her life. He said if I really cared about Chloe's success, I'd pay for Harvard and then disappear so she could have a normal relationship with her actual father. He actually said I should fund her education anonymously, so she wouldn't feel obligated to maintain contact with me. I told Mark that ship had sailed. Chloe had made it clear she saw my support as manipulation and wanted her real family to handle her education. I was simply giving her what she asked for. But here is what really got to me during that conversation. Mark admitted he'd been actively working to turn Chloe against me since the day she got into Harvard. He'd spent months telling her that accepting my money would damage her relationship with him. Mark had orchestrated Chloe's rejection of me. Those Instagram posts calling me manipulative weren't teenage confusion. They were the result of months of Mark convincing Chloe that my support came with inappropriate strings attached. He'd systematically poisoned our relationship and then convinced Chloe it was her idea to distance herself from me. Learning this made me even more determined not to restore the funding. Mark had gotten exactly what he wanted, Chloe choosing him over me. The only problem was that Mark couldn't actually replace what he'd convinced Chloe to reject. Yesterday, things got really intense. Chloe herself showed up at my office. She looked exhausted and stressed. She asked if we could talk privately about the Harvard situation. Chloe started by saying she understood why I was hurt by her comments, but that I was overreacting by destroying her future. She said she never meant to imply that I was a bad person, just that she needed to prioritize her relationship with her actual father. Chloe insisted that she appreciated everything I'd done, but that accepting my continued support would damage her family relationships. I told Chloe that I understood her position perfectly, which was why I was respecting her decision to handle her education through her real family. Chloe got frustrated and said I was being deliberately obtuse. She said there was a difference between not wanting to feel obligated to me and not wanting my help at all. Chloe tried to negotiate some kind of middle ground where I would restore the funding, but she wouldn't feel pressured to maintain a relationship with me afterward. She suggested that I could pay for Harvard as a final gift, and then we could go our separate ways cleanly. I asked Chloe if she understood what she was proposing. She wanted me to spend $280,000 on her education and then disappear from her life so she could have an uncomplicated relationship with Mark. She was asking me to fund her dreams and then accept permanent exile from the family I'd been part of for years. Chloe said that might sound harsh, but it was the most honest solution. She admitted that Mark felt threatened by my involvement in her life, and that maintaining a relationship with me would create ongoing family drama. Chloe said she'd rather sacrifice our relationship than risk damaging her connection with her actual father. Hearing Chloe lay it out so clearly was both devastating and clarifying. She understood exactly what she was asking for. Chloe wanted me to pay for her success and then voluntarily remove myself so she could have the family dynamic she preferred. It wasn't teenage confusion or Mark's manipulation. It was Chloe making a calculated choice about which relationships mattered more to her. I told Chloe no. If she wanted Mark to be her primary father figure and handle her major life decisions, then Mark could handle the financial responsibilities that came with that role. I wasn't going to fund her education, just to be discarded afterward. Chloe got angry and said I was proving her point about my support coming with strings attached. She said if I really cared about her success, I wouldn't make it conditional on maintaining a relationship with me. I told Chloe she was right, that my support did come with expectations. I expected basic respect and acknowledgement of our relationship. I expected not to be publicly dismissed as a manipulative outsider. Chloe said those expectations were exactly the problem. She said, accepting my money felt like accepting an obligation to perform gratitude and family connection that she didn't genuinely feel. According to Chloe, she'd rather struggle financially than feel pressure to maintain a relationship that felt forced and uncomfortable. That conversation ended with Chloe saying she hoped I could live with destroying her future over my wounded ego. She said, Mark might not have money, but at least he loved her without conditions or expectations of gratitude. I told Chloe she'd get exactly what she wanted, a relationship with Mark uncompromised by my involvement. She was free to build a family dynamic she preferred, just without my financial support. Chloe left my office, and I haven't heard from any of them since. Harvard classes start Monday. As far as I know, Chloe still doesn't have funding secured. Part of me wonders if she'll show up anyway, but honestly, I am not losing sleep over it anymore. Chloe made her choice. Mark made his choice. Sarah made her choice. They all decided that removing me from the family dynamic was worth more than Chloe's Harvard education. I am just giving them what they asked for. It has been 6 months since my last update, and so many of you have been asking for a final update. I've been putting this off because, honestly, writing about this family drama was exhausting, but I figure you all deserve to know how this mess finally played out. Quick recap, my ex-stepdaughter Chloe got into Harvard. I promised to pay the $280,000 for her education. She publicly rejected me as family and called my support manipulative. So, I withdrew funding right before classes started. Her dad, Mark, had been manipulating her against me while taking credit for funding he didn't have. So where are we now? Well, Chloe didn't go to Harvard. She ended up at our state university on a partial academic scholarship. Mark and Sarah managed to scrape together enough for in-state tuition, but it required Sarah taking on extra debt and Mark finally getting consistent employment. The family dynamics have completely shifted. Chloe's grandmother, who originally begged me to restore funding, now barely speaks to Mark. She told the whole extended family about how Mark had been lying about paying for Harvard while sabotaging my relationship with Chloe. Most of Sarah's family has essentially cut Mark out of gatherings. They see Mark as the reason Chloe lost her chance at Harvard, not me. Sarah and I had one final conversation about 3 months ago. She admitted that she should have shut down Mark's campaign against me from the beginning. Sarah said she was afraid of conflict with Mark and hoped the situation would somehow resolve itself without her having to choose sides. She acknowledged that by staying neutral while Mark poisoned Chloe against me, she essentially enabled the destruction of Chloe's Harvard opportunity. The most interesting development has been Chloe's perspective change. About 4 months ago, she started at State University and apparently had some kind of wake-up call about what she'd lost. Chloe reached out through Sarah, asking if we could meet to talk. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her campus. She looked different, more mature. Chloe started by apologizing for how she'd treated me and saying she understood now how badly Mark had manipulated the situation. Chloe explained that being at State University, instead of Harvard, was a daily reminder of the opportunity she'd thrown away. But what really struck me was that Chloe wasn't asking for money. She said she wanted to understand why I'd been willing to support her education in the first place, and why Mark had been so threatened by our relationship. I told Chloe that I genuinely cared about her success and had seen her as family, but that her rejection of that relationship had been devastating. I explained that being called manipulative and creepy for supporting someone I loved had made it impossible to continue. Chloe said she understood now that Mark had convinced her my support was about control rather than genuine care. She asked if there was any way to repair our relationship, not for financial reasons, but because she missed having me in her life. I told Chloe that I appreciated her apology, but that trust, once broken, was incredibly difficult to rebuild. She'd proven that family pressure could make her turn against me completely, and I wasn't willing to put myself in that position again. Chloe accepted my response and said she understood why I couldn't trust her anymore. That conversation gave me some closure, but it also confirmed my decision to maintain distance. Chloe may understand now what she lost, but the damage to our relationship was too severe to repair. As for Mark, he has been struggling with the consequences of his choices. His relationship with Chloe has actually gotten worse since Harvard fell through. Chloe blames him for destroying her opportunity, and their interactions are strained. Mark tried calling me a few months ago to suggest we work to get Chloe into Harvard for next year. I told him that Chloe was his responsibility now, exactly as he'd wanted. The extended family situation has been the most satisfying part of this whole mess. Everyone now knows that Mark sabotaged Chloe's Harvard opportunity through jealousy and manipulation. His reputation as a father and family member is permanently damaged. The money I'd set aside for Chloe's education is still sitting in my investment account, growing steadily. I've thought about donating it to scholarship programs, but honestly, I am enjoying having the financial security more than I expected. I've also been dating someone new for the past few months. Jessica is a teacher who has her own kids from a previous marriage, and she has been incredibly supportive about the whole situation. Having Jessica's perspective has been really valuable. Looking back, I think everyone got exactly what they asked for. Chloe wanted to prioritize her relationship with Mark over accepting my support, so now she has that relationship without my financial involvement. Mark wanted to be Chloe's primary father figure without competition from me, so now he has all the responsibilities that come with that role. Sarah wanted to avoid conflict between Mark and me, so now she doesn't have to deal with that tension because I am no longer involved in their family decisions. And I wanted to be treated with basic respect and appreciation for my support. When that didn't happen, I removed myself from the situation and found peace. The only person who really lost was Chloe, and that is unfortunate. But she was an adult who made her own choices about how to treat someone who was supporting her. Actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are permanent. I don't regret withdrawing my funding. Continuing to support her education would have sent the message that she could reject me personally, while keeping my money. I wasn't willing to be treated like a convenient ATM by someone who resented my existence in her life. 6 months later, I am at peace with how everything played out. Sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who take you for granted, even when walking away has serious consequences for them. Chloe will be fine at State University. Mark will continue being the father he always was. Sarah will keep trying to manage everyone's feelings without taking real stands. And I'll keep living my life surrounded by people who actually value and appreciate me. Sometimes that is the best revenge of all, just being happy without them.